Mindy, I have my presentation mode here and I'm not following the chat. So feel free to jump in and ask questions if the chat calls for that. So I'm happy to pause at any point and take questions if there are any. Okay.
Of course, I'm watching this one and our LinkedIn Live, so I will.
Very good. Thank you. So the first one is the idea of technology being a challenge for us as coaches. I'll tell you that I've had engagements where it's taken me up to 2 weeks to get access to the internal company email, right? As a coach, and that means that I don't have access to calendar. How many of you have had the experience where you're going into an engagement if you're a consulting coach? And you don't know when people are available for the first few weeks because you don't have access to schedules, and vice versa. Now you're getting meeting invites into items that are conflicting with other things that you've already had in your schedule. So onboarding to these tools is a first order of business when it comes to coaching remotely. In the past, people could ask us that as we walked the hallway, or we were in that introduction physical meeting. In a remote setting, we depend on these meetings for those kinds of conversations. So these are the tools that are most commonly used by Agile teams. And you want to make sure that you sweep you are onboarded as soon as possible into the full gamut of the tools that the teams use, right? That includes Jira or MS, or ADO, Azure DevOps, if that's what they're using. That means getting access to Zoom accounts if you're going to be using the one in the organization. Confluence Pages, which usually comes with Jira if that's what they're using, or SharePoint. I'm not going to go through these all, but I think you get the idea. It's pivotal that the first order of business is requesting access to these tools. Don't wait until you're in there and ready to hit the road to realize that it's going to take you a couple of weeks to start that process, right? From the other perspective, technology-wise, as coaches, it's becoming more and more necessary for us to be technology advisors to the elements necessary to have effective remote collaboration. There was a time when we had the luxury of being tool agnostic, where we teach and coach around the values and principles, but more and more, I am being asked, what are the right tools to use? What's the right composition for those tools? How do we use these tools? What if we have multiple tools, and comparing those? And I'm being drawn into those conversations, not only by the individual team members and the teams, but also by the leadership, by the directors, by the VPs. Tools are important in a remote setting. So the conversation is happening more often. We can't stand by anymore and hope that the organization figures it out. As coaches, it's our responsibility to offer some thoughts and some observations from prior experience and practices that we can offer. So with that, setting the stage, recognize that not all tools are built the same. This is not mine. This comes from Business Insider, where they compared the bandwidth requirement for the different desktop tools. It's just an example of the different considerations. If you have an international team in some parts of the world where bandwidth is not as abundant as it might be in your local area, this is an important consideration. So if the organization is not using the right tool, as coaches, we can help with that. Another area is in the composition of the project management tools, such as Jira or Azure DevOps. More and more, I'm having conversations about the tool structure, the actual product backlog decomposition structure, and the teams and how they're sharing those. Jira forces a different composition than Azure DevOps does, for example. Not that one is wrong or better than the other. It's just we need to consider the tools in our backlog management now more so than we did in the past, because we've been in engagements where that was done physically by way of stickies. Today, that seems like a distant world, and it was just a few years ago when that was more the standard way of capturing our information. So today, the tools are a center part of how the teams are managing their backlog, and it's important for us as coaches to coach around the difference between those, the advantages and disadvantages, right? In a technology group of challenges, there are subtopics that can help us to orient in how we can maneuver, or we can outpace some of the challenges that we see. Right. The first is the idea of the need for governance when it comes to tools. The corporate security compliance is a big consideration. Do not ignore that as you choose your tools, or as you yourself are using the tools of the organization. The tools are dependent on the features that the teams need. So make sure that the tools that are selected fit the needs of the team. As coaches, we want to have that conversation and make sure that there aren't significant gaps in what the team wants to do versus what the tool can do. And the information overload, the idea that we might have too many tools, and it's time to curve that back and have some single source of truths, if you will, in a way that doesn't confuse the teams. That's a lot. That's quite the list, right? We didn't have to do that in the past. Today, that's a standard form of working. These are standard considerations that we need to have. And in doing so, one technique that works is establishing a tool advisory board. This is a group of individuals. The name might sound larger than it is. This is a tool of individuals whose responsibility is to have proper governance around the tools, to have the necessary standards, the necessary inspection, the necessary implementation, right? As it pertains to the Agile teams. How is this different from IT support or the
Ernesto,
internal? Yeah.
I am getting asked, are the slides going to be made available?
Yes, we will do that in a cool way.
Yeah, I figured you'll email them to me and I can email them to, I'll drop my email and everybody can email me and let me know if they want them and I'll email them to them. Yep. Okay. Thank you. I figured as much. All right.
We will do that. And I think in real time, we can do a quick exercise here where I can drop them in Miro and also provide that link to individuals.
All right. Great. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. From a training perspective, we want to make sure that we increase the efficacy of the use of the tools. We coach around how well can the teams understand the use of the tools and the intended use for those. Maybe it has to do with the respective dashboard. So how we handling the actual product backlog items. We want consistency around that. We don't want one-off adoption of that. We want the teams on board. A neat way for that to happen organically is to establish a community of practice that cements those throughout the organization. So as coaches, we find ways to instill these and make them part of the organization and their DNA, and a community of practice is a good way of doing that. So offering that as a technique for your toolbox. And lastly is the need for support. The lack of access. How many of you have been locked out and can't access the tool, and that creates significant productivity impact? Unable to find the right information because, well, it's in a Confluence page here, but it's in an Excel there, or it's in an external third-party tool. And technical problems that we might have, whether they are in the area of not being able to access a particular board in Jira, if we're using that, or in Azure DevOps and DevOps pipeline, maybe. We need individuals that understand the tools at the team level. To open a case with IT, in order for me to request access to a specific board in Jira, it's simply going to take longer to understand what I'm asking for than it is for me to have an internal person empowered and enabled to do that. So identifying a tool administrator, a TA, is a great technique for us to keep the teams productive and remove some of the impediments that they face.